Live. Well, let's just see. We've got a minute here till 3 o'clock Pacific time. Studio says I'm live, has a button to end the stream. So maybe I'm live, but I am going to wait just to be punctual. I'm already on live chat. So anybody who wants to let me know that you're listening, please do so. Now, it's counting the seconds that I've been live, about 10 or 12 seconds. So hard to tell if you're really live or not. Only time will tell. I'm a complete newbie at this. 3 o'clock. Okay, my name's Stephen Cole. I've written Full Crazy Town. I've got a webpage, fullcrazytown.com. This is my podcast named Full Crazy Town. The first few podcasts will be mainly readings from my book, Full Crazy Town. But I want to emphasize the flashpoints that my book get into. First one has to do with the protocols of Zion, dates back thousands of years, secret societies like the Illuminati, etc., that call for the establishment of a new world order on their terms, often in Palestine, Zion, if word ever gets out about the Zionist plan, then the modern day Zionists from the World Zionist Organization, American Zionist Organization, their strategy is to blame Jews and watch as Israel disintegrates as a world power. This fits the plan to abolish all governments and all religions and to establish a global superpower along the lines of World Economic Forum, Gates Foundation, etc. Second flashpoint, the role that the media and Hollywood play in propagandizing all talking points. Now, a year ago, Cat Williams predicted all lies will be in 2024. And sure enough, held without bail, just like Epstein. And so I'm predicting, like Cat Williams predicts, the same thing's going to happen to Puff Diddy as Epstein. The empire is crumbling, and the bit players are the first to go. The elites won't fade without causing major disruptions to the world economy and the plans of the BRICS plus 5 countries. What we can do is try to mitigate their damage. So we're doomed. But you can either be part of the problem or we probably can't defeat them, but that's not the point. We have to fight the power. Otherwise, we are complicit with their plans. So the main idea is to help people bridge the gap, heal the divide. The main opponent, major media, Hollywood, special interest groups, NGOs, globalists, modern day problems similar to the Illuminati style solutionists like Scientology, these brain power foundations that know what's best for us and are here to bring about world peace and world salvation. I tend to focus on solutions like the ones that come from the on and on about mutual aid. And that's what I think is the bottom line. You have to get involved with your community, act locally, and think globally. There's Professor Richard Wolff, who advocates for workers' strikes. And then there's Chris Hedges, who says a general strike is necessary to get the establishment's attention. So as we go through this hour, feel free to make comments, suggestions. Now, my book is of 220 pages, 20 chapters. So if I don't cover something that you want to hear from or you want to cover yourself, wait for it. If you want me to address specific issues, odds are in time, I don't know how long it'll take to go through 20 chapters, probably not more than 4 or 5 sessions. But much of my book is an attempt to explore and how to talk with others about common causes and the greater good. So we have to discuss issues rationally without getting all emotional, hot under the collar about hot button issues. I want to address that. I'll stop reading and start commenting or addressing comments. So the book is Full Crazy Town: How Our Government's Time Led to Political Assassinations and a Corporate Coup. Back of the book: We all have been oppressed and exploited by the man. Urgh. By the man, I mean the militarists, corporatists, oligarchs, politicians, the Department of Homeland Security, the media conglomerates, the one who champion human rights, the environment, and special interest groups because it does nothing to address the systematic injustices or the scourge exacerbates the divide in deep economic distress. The haves scold the have-nots for their bad manners, racism, linguistic insensitivity, and garishness, while ignoring the root causes of their plight. The have-nots are getting tired of being disrespected, so they're voting for anyone who's not a Washington insider, because the insiders have proven themselves to be corrupt militarists intent on following their hegemonic goals to the ruination of us all. So I have a table of contents that deals with the 20 chapters, but I'm going to skip that and just get into my 2 parts of my book. Part 1 is a warning about how the government knows they're losing the trust of the average American, given the debacles of the Iraq War, 80s, banking bailouts, and genocide. So they've decided not to trust us to change our minds. They decided to push us to despise each other's differences, cultural identities, and or demographics. Time they pretend to be so concerned with protecting everyone that will acquiesce to censorship, deplatforming, and canceling. All this propaganda has one purpose: to distract us from their agenda. However, we have so much more in with each other than that we have differences, mainly how to overcome this small segment of wealthy individuals that have traumatized so many of us. Part 1 concludes with a plan to overcome mass trauma with a mass movement. Part 2 is pretty short, but it focuses on my original idea, was to write a book about how other Midwesterners, how they came to be in Eugene, Oregon in the mid 70s. I knew there were a lot of us because I'd met so many of them when I was a tree planter with a co-op called the Hodads, and through my connections with hundreds of pseudo hippie boomers at the Oregon Country Fair. However, no one was interested in my Write a Book with Me project, so I only include it here because I claim to be an activist and not an investigative journalist. I think my readers deserve to know about my background if I'm to be taken seriously. My original idea was to have everyone write their life story as an obituary in order to gain a different perspective. Then at the end come a bunch of adages, idioms, homilies, metaphors, jokes, and funny stories that I've gathered along the way on my incredible journey. So the preface starts this way. This book was written because I was unable to make sense of our government's policies and the many changes in the narratives being fed to us via experts and major media networks. Starting in 2016, a series of manufactured incidents were dreamt up, then cranked out. At first, these events seemed plausible enough. Russia helped Trump win, and then Russia made up a story about Hunter Biden's laptop. After a year or so of lockdowns, mandates, and changing recommendations, we were told to put our faith in Dr. Fauci and to believe in him when he yelled, "I am science, and anyone who doesn't believe me is a liar." We were told not to do our own research and that Joe Rogan was just an idiot who ingested horse paste. Many independent journalists and comedians began poking holes in official narratives, such as the vaccine being the only way to stop the spread. And then Fauci said that everyone would get the virus, but the boosters would decrease COVID severity. Many people reported being vaccine injured, and there were many unexplained sudden deaths in countries where the vaccine was administered. Were deplatformed, demonetized, and or censored. Then Biden squeaked out a win against the demon Trump, and his minions, Trump's minions, stormed the Capitol and caused, according to the alarmist media, a crisis not seen since 9/11. Trump signed the order to withdraw from Afghanistan. Then Biden was tasked with the job, which most agreed he botched. However, not as not many seemed to notice because at the same time the nightly news started each broadcast with Putin's military buildup on Ukraine's border. For 1/2 year, the war warnings increased in volume, tone, frequency, intensity, and duration. Finally, on 2/24/22, the denazification began. Putin's special military operation, hundreds of billions of dollars began pouring into the Ukrainian government and military controlled by the Azov battalion, neo Nazis. As the proxy war lost steam, Israel decided to press the issue that's been on the mind of all Zionists for decades: total control of Palestine. Without the indigenous people getting in to initiate its war on Gaza, many older Americans on the left flipped from being so concerned about the rights of vulnerable race and gender groups to not caring about people of color in Gaza. Additionally, the right flipped from being the protectors of free speech and poking fun at woke snowflakes to demanding protection for Jewish students in the US who feel threatened, and to demand pro Palestinian rhetoric be equated with hate speech and violence. How could people think it's okay to commit ethnic cleansing against people who have been occupied for 75 years? Follow the money, the answer becomes clear. Starting in 2016, it seemed to me the government was engaging in excessive overreach and edging towards authoritarian. I felt that if I just stood by and watched, that I was being part of the problem. It seemed to me, if you don't fight the power, you're complicit with whatever the power is doing. Then Whitney Webb began promoting her 2-volume masterpiece, One Blackmail. I was enthralled by her thorough investigative journalism. She puts off praises for her accuracy and bravery with comments about how she feels compelled to seek the truth about world events based on her loyalty to her and herself. I feel the same way about myself in this book. I feel driven to try and get my thoughts in order while I can and try to do something about government overreach. Now, mind you, I think it's basically game over as far as dialing back the globalists' plan, but I'm compelled to act with honor and urgency as I try to mitigate their damage. This book represents my journey, sounding a clarion call regarding our government's attempt to reframe reality. My opinions are based on the paraphrasing of several podcasters. So if a reader doubts anything I say, don't take my word for it. Do what I did, my own research. That also known as reading and listening to real independent media. I'm not trying to reinvent the investigative journalism of the podcasters that I listen to. Much of what I say in this book is indirectly quoting them, so I consider myself an activist, not a journalist. I call this book a memoir and a mission. So forgive me if it seems like I'm ranting about crazy things or trying to mansplain something. I'll be fair, Anton Wilson. A lot of information here. Pretty sure that 99% of it can be verified. The 1% comes down to differences of opinions between my favorite dozen or so podcasters. It's difficult to write about current events without a brief bit of context. CIA agent J. Fletcher Prouty, the Mr. X of from Oliver Stone's JFK, said in his book, The Secret Team, the CIA and its allies are in control of the US and the world, 1973. That settler colonialism goes back to the British East India Company. Thomas Malthus was a professor of history and political economy at the East India College in Hertfordshire, where his Malthusian knowledge too, and he and Malthus helped to legalize the exploitation and genocide of colonized people. Fletcher Prouty jumps to World War II, and he documents the way Nazis, scientists, bureaucrats from Hitler's Third Reich were recruited by the OSS, which was a forerunner of the CIA, in a series of emigrations called Operation Paperclip. He said that the Cold War against the communists was already in the making. He talks about the 30 Years' War in Indochina, beginning with the OSS arming and equipping Ho Chi Minh, so his army was that resulted from US operatives dividing Vietnam in half and then terrorizing 1 million residents in the north to flee to Saigon in boats and planes provided by the US. The refugees were just dumped off without any support, food, or housing. The chaos led Ho Chi Minh finally restoring order just in time to fend off the US advisors and later troops sent to encourage civil war and to quell the violence. Fletcher Prouty wrote about the opposing ideologies regarding Vietnam between JFK and RFK and McGeorge Bundy, and run for re-election on a peace platform. Bundy and Dulles began ignoring orders, trying to blame JFK for the Bay of Pigs debacle. JFK and his brother began to work with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, trying to ignore. The rest is the history detailed in Stone's film about Kennedy's assassination. Estes wrote about the Massachusetts Bay Colony. His book, Our History is the Future. He describes the Massachusetts Bay Colony as another settler colonial enterprise bent on resource ripoffs, enslavement, and genocide. He described the crimes continuing nonstop up to and through the Dakota Access Pipeline protests at Standing Rock. Israel's reaction to the October 7th attacks kicked the war machine into overdrive. For many people who closely follow historical events, this is it, the penultimate moment, and the Christian fascists and the war profiteers are fighting for existence. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, if these greedy psychopaths don't get their way, they will leave far more ruination in their wake than they've caused already. There are more Christian Zionists in the US than there are Jewish people in the world. Chris Hedges, in his book, Christian Fascists, describes dominionism as being born out of known as Christian Reconstructionalism. It seeks to politicize. It has a belief in magic, along with leadership, adoration, and a strident call for moral and physical supremacy. Mostly white American Christians. It also has, like fascist movements, an ill-defined and shifting set of beliefs, some of which contradict one another. He goes on to define colonialism or colonization as something that takes people's stories away and assigns them supportive roles in stories that empower others at their expense. The dominionist movement, like all totalitarian movements, seeks to appropriate not only our religious and patriotic language, but also our stories, and to deny the validity of stories other than their own, to deny that there are other acceptable ways of living and being. There becomes, in their rhetoric, only one way to be a Christian and only one way to be an American. Many denominations buy into this philosophy, including the evangelicals, Southern Baptists, the Zionists, the Christian right, and the dominionists. Twitter had a post, Howard's book, Dead Men Tell No Tales, that mentions a quote by Ghislaine Maxwell, who filmed U.S. politicians having sex with underage girls to blackmail the politicians, not the girls. Another book, Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow, recounts his efforts to expose Harvey Weinstein's decades of rape, sexual assault, and sex abuse. Ronan says that Harvey used the Black Cube, a private Israeli intelligence service, to pressure NBC executives to kill the story. So he took the story to the New Yorker, where it was published, leading to the hashtag #MeToo movement. As readers will discover, Epstein and Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase are characters in this book. I don't think many Americans know how deep their interconnections were or what impact they've had on world events. As the Israeli war on Gaza continues, the stranglehold Christian Zionists have on our politicians is becoming evident. It's a polarizing issue that demands everyone declare which side they are on. Many fear that our government is leading us down a ruinous path, while others don't, won't, or can't even think about it. One thing is clear, the establishment knows how to make excuses for their psychopathic behaviors, like when they accuse their opponents of the very crimes they are committing, or interrupt anyone who questions or accuses them, or change the narrative by fixing on a stray comment, predetermined talking points, or a rhetorical gaffe. Of course, They must make some lame excuse for their actions, so they just invent strange, ironic explanations that sound like they're lifted off the pages of The Onion, or they speak with a loud volume, high pitch, serious tone, radical intensity, near constant frequency, and never ending duration. Sometimes they can't talk at all. They stutter 4 and 5 times, mispronounce words, utter spoonerisms, and babble. They stare intently into their camera, waving their hands around for extra emphasis, seeming to strangle their imaginary foes. Ah! In the 60s, when young radicals were gaining visibility, credence, and cachet, the anti war, anti racism protesters were seen as cool rebels. The Black Panthers took the movement level. Departments. Huey Newton, Eldridge, Bobby Seale spoke about their 10-point program they wanted from the administration, which was to include full employment, decent housing and education, an end to police brutality, and for Blacks to be exempt from military service. During World War II, many Blacks moved to California and worked at the Kaiser shipyards, an odd name for a shipyard building ships for the fight against Germany. The young Blacks growing up in the Bay Area faced new forms of political and race politics and racism unfamiliar to their parents, and they sought to develop new forms of subordination in the South. Not much changed in the cities of the North and West, as the wartime and post war jobs, which drew much of the Black migration, fled to the suburbs along with white residents. Blacks were concentrated in poor urban ghettos with high unemployment and substandard housing, and were mostly excluded from political representation, top universities, and the middle class. Northern and Western police departments were almost all white, and in 1966, only 16 of Oakland's 661 police officers were African American, less than 2.5%. In October of 1966, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party. In formulating a new political system, they drew on their work with a variety of Black Power organizations. Newton and Seale first met in 1962 when they were both students at Merritt College. They joined Donald Worden's Afro American Association, where they read widely, debated, and organized in an emergent Black nationalist tradition inspired by Malcolm X and others. Eventually dissatisfied with Worden's efforts to accommodate many differing viewpoints, they developed a revolutionary anti imperialist perspective, working with more active groups like the Seoul Students Advisory Council and the Revolutionary Action Movement. Their paid jobs running youth service programs allowed them to develop a revolutionary nationalist approach to community service, later a key element in the Black Panthers Party's community survival programs. Huey and Bobby wanted to challenge police brutality, and after cops murdered Matthew Johnson, an unarmed Black man in San Francisco, Newton observed that the violence that followed. He had an epiphany that would distinguish the Black Panthers from the multitude of Black Power organizations. Newton saw the explosive, rebellious anger of the ghettos and believed that if he could stand up to the police, he could organize that force into political power. Inspired by Robert F. Williams' Armed Resistance to the KKK and Williams' book, Negroes with Guns, Newton studied gun laws in California. He decided to follow the police around and monitor them for incidents of brutality called cop watching. Huey and Bobby bought guns and ammo with proceeds from the sale of Mao's Little Red Book at 3 times their purchase price to leftists and liberals on the Berkeley campus. Malcolm X came out of prison in New York City after being sentenced for larceny. He had converted to Islam in jail and was working a variety of jobs while preaching for the Nation of Islam. One of the jobs that brought him into friendship, one of these jobs brought him into friendship with Elroy Sanford, a dishwasher at Jimmy's Chicken Shack, who aspired to be a comedian. Both had reddish hair, so Sanford was called Chicago Red after his hometown, and Malcolm was known as Detroit Red after his last residence before moving to Harlem. Years later, Sanford became famous as the comedian and actor Red Fox. Earlier, when summoned by the local draft board for service into World War II, Malcolm Little feigned mental disturbance by rambling and declaring, "I want to be sent down south, organize dem N-word soldiers, steal some and kill us some crackers." He was service. In the last year of his life, we declare our rights on this earth to be a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. No doubt Lewis Powell was thinking the same thing when he wrote his infamous Powell memo advocating for pushback against the gains of the civil rights and anti-war movements, the gains that the civil rights and the anti-war movements had made. Through the war on drugs, the Nixon and Reagan regimes brought home the repressive tactics that Allen Dulles' CIA had been using worldwide. Then the Democrats jumped on the tyrannical bandwagon as Bill Clinton bought into the neocon goal of hegemony when he used NATO to enforce the Dayton Accords by attacking the Serbian army and bombing Belgrade for 78 days in a row. Bill also ruined the US economy by passing the NAFTA and GATT reforms. W. Bush and Cheney kicked off the war on terrorism and the forever wars. Obama ran on a get us out of Afghanistan pledge and then got us involved in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and Libya. We now have a uniparty duopoly system where trillions go into the war industry and American citizens fight over the scraps. After listening to Chris Hedges and Gabor Mate talk about possible solutions to the trauma afflicting many Americans, I came with an idea: reconnect over coffee. This is an effort to bridge the divide between those who became estranged from their friends and or families and now want to reconnect. I want to become a better debater so I can discuss issues and maybe change a few minds without getting all emotional. Mainly, I see the need to unite against the forces on Wall Street, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C., Silicon Valley, the Zionists, and the World Economic Forum, and similar agencies, and not let them fool us into petty disputes with each other. I'd like this book to be used as a handbook to help others get their thoughts in order become better debaters too. A disclaimer: Democrats and Republicans, traditionally, they stood for the working class. I consider them especially to be sellouts. I criticize them, it might have offended snowflakes. However, to be clear, both political parties stand for the Zionist goals of world domination, and nothing can slow them down short of a mass movement. As the Palestinian genocide shifts into high gear, past critics of US policies like Joe Rogan and Alex Jones are suddenly all on board with labeling dissent as anti Semitism and calling out for the jailing of domestic terrorists. Throughout this book, I'll try to explain the way we are propagandized every day. Gabriel Rockhill, the author historian, spoke with Nick Cruz of the Revolutionary Black Network and explained how we're conditioned towards exchange values, like paying for a diploma to get a big salary instead of use values. So there's exchange values, like paying for a diploma, and then there's use values, that is acquiring skills that you can use to get goods and services. He says that imperialists use categories like religion, statehood, race, gender, sex, and sexuality to divide the people and pit us against each other. Dialectical materialism, developed in the 19th century, demonstrates the falsity of this approach. Marx and Engels said that history is driven by socioeconomic factors and material forces driving for infinite wealth accumulation, capitalism. These forces dehumanize indigenous populations so that outside settlers can exploit the people and their resources. To get the people behind these capitalist schemes, they must be taught to distrust, fear, and hate everyone not in their group. This hatred is weaponized at an ideological level so that anyone who doesn't share your philosophy is to be despised and attacked. Cultural issues are important, yes, but they should not be used to dehumanize others. Introduction. The man doesn't have to do anything to split the left. The left is the only movement that seeks to make itself ineffective by encouraging more and more discussions, endless meetings, subcommittees, study groups, all making sure that all voices are heard. The man just points out the problems: climate crisis, sexism, racism, and then helps fund environmentalists, feminists, BLM activists, and LGBTQIA plus groups, making them dependent on the money, and then makes them compete for more money, so they must constantly prove that they are the most threatened, vulnerable, and needy faction. Resistance to the establishment has been channeled into hatred of anyone who doesn't agree with personal ideologies. I'm referring to what has been called the cult of the self, seen in the glorification of celebrities, rich people, and politicians. The main recruiter into this cult is the mainstream media, which goes beyond the 60s narratives about the American dream and instead constantly points out how unique and special everyone is and how people need to identify with groups that share their common causes. This works if the causes are reasonable and just. It's up to each of us to decide if our tribe is working for the betterment of all or is just a selfish cult. This adherence to tribalism goes back tens of thousands of years when everyone depended on their community for sustenance and support. People had to be loyal to their tribe, otherwise, they'd be expelled, which meant certain death. In medieval times, the Catholic Church tried to copy this system by using excommunication to cast out the unfaithful and the non believers. The cult of the self doesn't work in the same way. The recent Rage Against the War Machine rally in DC was boycotted by Code Pink's Medea Benjamin because she didn't want to share a stage with Jackson Hinkle due to misogynistic comments he allegedly made. The comedian Jimmy Dore chided her by imagining her saying, "Sure, I want to bring about world peace, but not with those people." Frederick Douglass said, "I'll work with anyone to do good and no one to do bad." This is like the old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." We must overcome our feelings of being easily offended and think about the greater good and common causes. Since 2001, I've come to realize that the government doesn't have my best interests in mind. Feelings of abandonment crept in, leading to cognitive dissonance and confusion. This abandonment led to trauma, and the only remedy for that is to reestablish contacts with those from whom we've become estranged. As we grope our way back to some form of normalcy, two entirely different types of people emerge: compassionate or selfish. One category leans towards working for equal rights and justice. The second one stands for self aggrandizement, special rights, and the accumulation of wealth and power. My humble opinion, we're born into this world full of valuable resources, so we each should receive our fair share, and no one should get a greater share without mass consent. The policies and rules that surround the distribution of goods and services are called politics. The fact that many people say they don't want to talk about politics or religion has always puzzled me, because it seems like those two topics should be almost all we talk about. Everything else is just a distraction from the things that really matter. Many believe that the battle is between Democrats and Republicans, but a more realistic image is top versus bottom. That is, the greedy psychopaths versus everyone else. Politicians pretend to care about citizens and marginalized groups, but they don't. Organizations that may have started out dedicated to progress, unification, justice, and/or peace have been co-opted by donations from the groups they supposedly oppose. And they often fragment into self-interest groups who seem to be too busy engaging in linguistic battles to even dream about solving our real big problems. I consider our biggest problem to be the dedication of resources to warfare instead of healthcare. Issues like homelessness, drug addiction, unemployment, sagging GNP, plus physical and mental and spiritual health problems could be alleviated if we had universal health care. How did this happen? As a straight white man, I can't even ask that question, because for millions, my gender and race are the number one reason the world, our country, and society in general are in such peril. Those millions have a point. It is a criminal cabal of mostly white men that has taken over our government and world affairs, as evidenced by societies like the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Society, the G7, the Bohemian Society, and NATO. However, I don't agree with those Zionists, so I resent people who are biased against me because I'm a white guy. Hopefully, what follows won't sound like I'm scolding, lecturing, mansplaining, or preaching, since those are the aspects of infighting that I'd like to avoid. My anti-war mentality started in reaction to the Kent State massacre. 4 innocent students were killed and 9 seriously wounded as they protested the war or walked to class at Kent State University in Ohio on May 4th, 1970. I also developed a healthy distrust of the corporate media because they drifted from investigative journalists like Jim Garrison and his book about JFK's assassination to acting as a stenographer for government officials. For 50 years, I've made it a personal mission to promote peace, love, and justice for all. I'm a proud pseudo hippie boomer trying to, as Spike Lee said, do the right thing. However, as the rapper Ice Cube said, divisional politics is like being stuck in a bad movie and you can't find the exit. So, part 1 starts with chapter 1, more reasons for writing this book. Closing in on an hour, and I don't want to go over until I'm sure that this is working. So I'm going to cut it off here and just kind of set the stage for episode 2 next Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. I had people try to help me write this, and reading it over, I can still see that I have dozens of typos and mistakes made. But when I read it, I'm kind of glossing over those. So maybe it's better to just listen to my book for free and not have to buy it. Only $14.22 on by going to Ingram Spark print on demand. But my goal is not to make money off this. It's to spread the word about what's going on. How did this happen? How did the media, politicians do this to us, fool us into thinking, oh, you have to vote left or right. You must make a choice. So there were several reasons for writing this book, and I do want to get into them next time, but it's basically about 10 or 12 pages of 3 different, somewhat similar but slightly different reasons. The main one being I was going nuts starting in about 2016. I was going crazy thinking about, it went from Russiagate to Laptop Gate to COVID Gate to Insurrection Gate to Proxy War Gate to Genocide Gate. And once we hit Genocide Gate, that's when I said, okay, time to publish, baby. It's over. It's all going to be over. We're going to have World War III or nuclear holocaust unless we can kind of rein in the globalists, the hegemonists, and the Zionists to keep from doing the neocon and now the neoliberal plan of full war, no way but our highway, and death to anyone who gets in the globalists' way. And I do mean death, destruction, deplatforming, demonetizing, discouraging. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. You had Hillary Rodham Clinton just recently getting on about people who repeat negative talking points against the government should be put in jail. And this is according to the Human Rights Commission, HRC. What is that also? Oh yeah, Hillary Rodham Clinton. So it's just a big cabal of the elites, of the powerful, they feeling the pressure, no longer even trying to make excuses. They're just saying, hey, our interests in the Middle East are threatened. We're just going to give billions and billions to Israel and billions and billions to keep on funding Ukraine's war against Russia, and just billions and billions and trillions every year to fund the military industrial complex. So I'm going to cut it off there, 9 minutes till 4. And I hope this got through. I don't know if anybody was watching, but I am going to go back and try to do some research to see if I'm doing this the right way. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. And if you want to get into the second episode, tune in next Sunday at 3 p.m. Pacific time to Full Crazy Town. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.